Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here,
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
and it's number 27, isn't it? Number
Yeah,
27 was Sounding the Shallows, and before that, Endless, what was it called then? No Shore in Sight, wasn't it?
yeah.
We did before that, yeah.
Well, we're being told the shore is just about in sight,
Yes,
aren't we,
I know,
again?
they're using some very interesting metaphors. We'll talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, it is very good news. It really, really is, and I don't know. I think we need it. And somebody said to me this week, it's the most difficult year of their lives,
Mm,
and I wouldn't be surprised to hear that many people
mm,
will say that
mm,
that overall it's the most
mm,
difficult year
mm, mm.
that they face. So it's real light in darkness.
What, the vaccine?
Yeah,
It
and
is.
and and and
Yes,
light in darkness. It's Advent.
it is. It
Yeah.
is Advent. You know, I was looking up the actual definition of Advent because I thought, well, I know what it is, but I
Mm.
don't know exactly how it would be described. And what I read, I thought was maybe just a little stern. Advent typically involves a season of prayer, fasting, and repentance, followed by anticipation, hope, and joy. It seemed
Yes.
so clear cut. You have your
Yes.
season of prayer, fasting, and
Mm.
repentance, then you're allowed to
Yes.
look forward. And then I thought, you know what? It actually is a little bit like this. I mean, what is it Boris is saying at the moment? We're now in the season to be jolly, but we've got to be jolly sensible.
Yeah.
We're still in darkness in the UK. Oh, I've heard from somebody from Australia saying how great it is. You know, the border from Melbourne is open. And I know in a lot of places it is good, but I also know it's not great in the
Yeah.
UK. We've still got a lot of deaths. We've still got a lot of darkness. Every death is a sadness for a family. And I was thinking maybe this year, when we look forward to hope and joy, it isn't the commercially tinselly things at all, is it? It's wanting to be with our families if we possibly can, but also denying ourselves being with our families simply because that would be a really, really bad idea. It's
Yeah.
a very complex time, this Advent.
It's really difficult. And of course, the other Advent also was a very complex time when the were angels and shepherds and um, tidings of comfort and joy. And the trouble with those words is we've probably heard them too often.
Mm,
But actually, Advent is, if you believe in it, is the coming of the most incredible change
mm,
in the lives of everybody.
mm. But they didn't know it
They didn't know
until it
it.
happened.
No, they
And in a
didn't.
way,
No,
that's where we're at, isn't it? They
that's right.
don't know
Yeah.
it until it happens. It was nice, wasn't it? We had somebody send us some thing. I really loved them. They were, what they called them were tiny poems from a school in New Zealand. The children had been asked to come up with their idea of what Advent meant to them.
Yeah, and there's some interesting. Well, here are some of them. Refugees in a sinking raft suddenly spy the lights of a lifeboat.
Gosh, that's
Well, that's
profound for a child
pretty
to
good,
have
isn't
thought
it?
of that, isn't it?
Then there was holiday faces pressed to car windows. Who will be the first to see the sea?
Not quite so profound and a bit more competitive,
For
but
us,
in a way.
we never had a car. We went on the train, but that was just as exciting, actually. What else have we got? Turning off the lights before you bring in the Christmas cake. That's quite nice.
Oh,
Isn't
that's
it?
really nice. I know somebody who was so concerned that they had lights on their Christmas pudding and the light kept going out. So they kept going back out the door in order to come in again so that the lights could be burning and it could be photographed. But
Right.
again, there's something, yeah,
Loses something through
it does. So
repeating
what
it.
about you then, Adrian? When you think of Advent, what do you think about?
Well, interestingly, I do often think about Germany because for years, more than 2 decades, I was, as you know, I was touring, and often at that time of
Mm,
the year in
mm,
Germany,
mm,
in different cities and
mm.
different beers, which was very important. With my friend Christian and translation, we had a great time, and the Germans enjoy Christmas. So I remember the fairs there and the excitement people felt. It was quite old fashioned in its way.
I remember the first time you went, Adrian, because it had been snowing, and you said looking out of the plane, You felt as though you were in one of those war films.
I did, yes. It was
black and white.
Probably wasn't the best way to feel, but I could almost hear the drums throbbing in the background, and there were the white patches of snow down on the ground, and I was in a plane throbbing my way towards Germany. Yeah.
Well, and the first time it was throbbing your way towards the unknown, wasn't it? And actually, there were a lot of lights, and Europe do pre-Christmas stuff really well, don't they? Now, for me, because I was thinking about this just before, and I think my most profound experience of Advent is not that long ago. We went to Ripon Cathedral, didn't we? And cathedrals do Advent rather remarkably, don't they? Because
they've got a very good setting for it.
Huge amount of darkness, and then out of the darkness finally come flickers of candlelight, and it's more than words, because these things are mysteries, aren't they? They're so much more than just putting something into neat little words, really.
I don't know what it was about that service, the one we went to at Advent. We were in the back row, I think, because we, as is our wont, were late.
I think we got the time wrong, as is our wont, yep.
But that did mean that we had a lot of space around us. And the moment when the children came out of the shadows, holding their candles, and the music, the unremitting progress of music and readings and lights and shadow was one of the most moving times I've known for a very, very long time. I really enjoyed it.
It'd be really lovely, wouldn't it? I mean, those little prayers are just single line. It'd be lovely to hear from some of you what hits you. You know, darkness, but looking towards something that we now know is light, and we now know there's a vaccine. So maybe this Advent is different from any others, really.
Yeah. Let us know if there's anything you'd like people to hear about.
What we've heard as well, which we do love hearing from people, and we heard, we were talking about prayer, weren't we? And we heard from one or two people, again, their experience of prayer. And what I'm loving, I think you are as well, is they're all so different, really. I mean, somebody was saying that what helps them is knowing, or at least seeing a picture of the personal situation they're praying for, and how they find it really hard. It's a very honest thing, really hard to pray for people they don't know and haven't met. And I know sometimes we have things come round from our church, don't we, to pray for people. And it is easier if you know the person. You can still pray, but...
Or it's easier if you don't know anything.
Yeah.
If you remember the other day, we prayed for some person we've never known, never met, don't know their name, somewhere in prison for their faith, sitting in the dark, thinking no one's remembered them, and saying to God, we don't know who this is, but that person has a name, and we want to ask you to look after that person wherever they are. Yeah. And that was oddly meaningful.
I think you're right. I think it was. Yeah. On a totally different subject. This same person sent a picture of some scarecrows that she's making to march across the fields looking for the place where Jesus is. She says they might be a bit late, but there are a couple of houses round here where Jesus actually is. And she's made her scarecrows into kings, and she sent a picture of them. And she said even Basil, her dog, is scared of them. And I think if these were the kings, they would probably be stopped on their way to Bethlehem and probably stopped from going there, let alone...
Yes, they might.
Yeah.
What does she mean? They'll find Jesus in one or two of the houses?
I think she means that there are some Christians living in some of the houses, so they might be...
Oh, right. Here's another one. Somebody said, I read that 80% of success in life is showing up. So that is what I'm trying to do.
And actually, that has had quite an effect on me, really. I thought, we've got to show up. Talk to God, show up.
Yeah.
Whether it's success, I don't know quite. But
I think some people would say God has to show up too.
Yeah.
And, whether that's a right or wrong thing to think or feel, that is how some people are feeling at the moment. And that person goes on to say, I grew up in a faith tradition that most appreciated spontaneous prayers. And they all sounded very similar, surrounded by people who told me God said something particular to them on a regular basis. And I become very sceptical of that and actually very jealous, because God doesn't seem to say very much to me when I pray, or maybe I'm just a bad listener. I don't know. Person says, I often don't know how to pray. My eyes lit up when you mentioned the liturgy, because I joined an Anglican church and fell in love with it, she said. And it's amazing how actually, for me, how timeless and beautiful the liturgy is.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah.
Because I think we mentioned how liturgy last week, how liturgy sometimes can be just the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, some people love open prayer, and I do too, sometimes. But some people don't find it easy to speak to God in front of others. To be honest,
No.
if you do, it's excellent. But I mean, there are others who, and I know some people will understand this, that find the sound of your own voice quite unreal and really oddly embarrassing because of that. And we've actually met people who don't go for prayer because of that.
Of course.
And it's not because of lacking faith. I don't think it can be, because if we're honest, open prayer can be more pedestrian and uncommunicative in its tone than fixed liturgy. Now, there are exceptions to all rules. I mean, we've been to wonderful open prayer meetings. We've been to wonderful.
And some people are just relaxed and
services.
comfy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's lovely. And you know that they're going to just put it right and say it right. But I was thinking, even as you were saying that, Adrian, that when we were at Scargill House, one thing that we used to say to people is that thing you've talked about before, about Malachi, that you discovered that there's a line in there that says God receives our conversation as prayer.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that sometimes just having a chat and then just taking the whole bundle to God.
Well, it takes the pressure off. And to be honest, trying to rehash the things you've been saying so that God gets a synopsis doesn't seem the greatest idea.
Well, it isn't just that, is it? It's that while you're listening to somebody, you're spending your time thinking, I must remember the name of Auntie May and I must remember the date of something or other, instead of just thinking, God's listening to this as well. We don't need to worry quite so much.
You need to know Malachi 3:16.
Oh, yes.
In my translation, God received their conversation as prayer. So sometimes if you start by saying, right, we're going to talk now, and whatever we say, we send straight up to God.
Yeah.
And that's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Because another strange thing about the UK this week, it seems to have been, remember about Advent, never mind about learning about the vaccine, never mind about all the numbers. It's been a week of metaphors.
Well, we mentioned that earlier, didn't we? Yes. Yeah. What, we've got two examples. What was the one that you noticed?
Well, that was the one you were noticing, wasn't it?
Oh, well, yeah, there was a lady doctor, I think it was. And obviously, people must sit and say, I've found a really good metaphor I'm going to use at 5 o'clock when we talk about things. And she said, well, this is how, it's the same as this journey, if you want to know how the speed goes with all the development of the vaccines and all that sort of thing. She said, eventually you arrive at the foothills. Like
I think you get prepared
like a mountaineer,
first.
you prepare, yes. You're a mountaineer. You get to the foothills, and then after that, it's the final sprint to the end. Well, I'm not a mountaineer, but I would be prepared to bet there aren't many mountaineers who stand in the foothills and say, good, the final sprint. Here we go, dashing up the Everest to the
where
very
oxygen
peak.
is very thin and you run out of energy and all the rest of it. But there's another one. There's a guy who's so knowledgeable, who's telling us all sorts of things and showing us graphs of things. But he's got a bit fixated about trains. Maybe he likes trains, I don't know. But what he's been saying is that where the train, we've been in the station waiting for the train, and now the train is on its way. It's not here yet, but it is coming. And what's really important is to get on the train. And I found myself thinking, if you weren't 100% listening and 100% focused, I can imagine quite a few people saying, he says we've got to get on the train.
You think someone will be saying, George, we've got to get on the train.
Yes,
quick.
we're not going to get that vaccine if we don't get on the train.
But where do we get on? I don't know, they didn't say. Just said we've got to get on the train.
Mind you, for somebody like you, these things really matter, don't they? You've always been pedantic about things making sense and also about rhyming.
I am a pedant, yes. I don't want to be, actually, but I am. Some of the Christian, well, it isn't poetry, some of the rhyming Christian stuff gets on my nerves. things like this.
I think you
we've done this
yeah.
before, but I'll read it again. It was 1983 when I asked Jesus into my life, closely followed 3 weeks later by my wife. Right.
Mm.
The trouble is, people write a line like, God speaks gently, God speaks sternly. And then they think Mernley, Gurnley, Cernley, Durnley. And they end up with God speaks gently, God speaks sternly, God speaks out to those in Burnley. And if they're honest, they'll say, well, it's the only thing that rhymed with sternly. But if they're not, they might say, I felt God really nudge me when it came to putting in Burnley. But there we are. There we are.
It gets worse, though, doesn't it?
It gets worse than that, yes. I've been singing, trying to sing like Bob Dylan and failing miserably. But some of you might have heard my attitude to John Lennon's failure to rhyme. I mean, one of the most famous songs. This is what he sings, right? I was feeling insecure. You might not love me anymore. More? Insecure and more? If John Lennon...
You see what I mean? He's getting very worked up here.
If he'd phoned me... I didn't know him, but if he'd phoned me for an idea, I'd have given him 2 choices, right? Here's one. I was feeling insecure. You went to Brighton with Frank Muir. And for those who don't remember Frank Muir at all, how about this one? I was feeling insecure. You tried to stab me with a skewer. Now that's dramatic, isn't it? I mean, that's really vivid.
Oh dear, you need to get that off your chest every now and then, don't you?
I do, yes.
Well, I suppose the other thing about this week for us in the UK is it's been a week of considerable confusion, because having been locked down for a month, we're now in tiers, and those tiers are quite complex. 3 tiers in the UK. And we had to wait to find which tier we'd been put into, rather like, I don't know, it felt very odd. We didn't have a choice. It was like children waiting to see which class they'd be in. And each area has its own freedoms and its own rules, and they're quite stern, really. And I noticed today in the paper there seemed to be quite a debate going on, because in tier 2, right, pubs can be open if they're serving with drink a substantial meal, and there seems to have been quite a big thing going on about whether a Scotch egg constitutes a substantial meal. Even Michael Gove getting involved in the debate and starting by saying he didn't think it was, and then changing his mind. And it's just so odd, really.
I think it will end in tears.
You have to say that.
Actually, I hope it won't end in tears.
You've been waiting to say that.
I have been waiting for an opportunity to say that for some little while. Yeah. Anyway,
one of the nice things this week is we had an email from some people we know quite well, a young couple. They got married last year, and they are living and working on Papa Stewart. I've said that wrong. But it's a little island way off the coast of the north coast of Scotland.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
And they're working for a croft, and they've planned to stay there. And I looked at some pictures of it, and there's nothing there at all, really, that I could see. And it's so separate from the mainland. And I found myself thinking, it's a bit how it feels. These tiers, you may not be separated by a great bit of water, but you kind of are separate, because the people down the road can do things you can't do. The people up the road can't do things you can do. And we have to keep checking the rules.
That's right. We do have to keep looking up the rules, don't we, to find out what we can and can't do.
And there is that sense even more, I think, for some people of isolation. We had an email, didn't we, from somebody who represents a charity that we've been involved in the past, and who said, I'm very aware of how much the COVID restrictions have been taking their toll on our members. So many stories of isolation, loneliness, crumbling of usual social and support structures. My boundaries.
Yes, your boundaries have diminished considerably, haven't they?
Well, they have. Anybody who hasn't picked up the fact that I broke my ankle, I'd like to tell you all about... No, I wouldn't really. But I am now managing to get from room to room downstairs in a wheelchair, and I'm not doing too badly. But it is very odd. I can't go in the garden because the steps down into the garden are too steep. And I can't go upstairs. I can just about, if you yank me hard, get out the front door, which is quite a scary process
I
going
think
up
we
the
can,
road.
we can do that.
But it is interesting that
Yeah.
my boundaries have
Yeah.
shrunk into something
And
I
it
can
doesn't
and can't
really
do.
suit you, does it?
I'm sure you can hear what Adrian's trying to say.
No, I mean it is very limiting. But next Tuesday or Wednesday rather, a stellar lift is going to appear in our
not
house.
just for me, but for you as
For
well.
me as well,
isn't
because my
it?
back is so bad.
Yeah.
And so everything changes.
Yeah.
We can easily get up and downstairs,
Yeah.
and you can sleep.
It's been good
upstairs.
for me, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
we know so many people who struggle with mobility. Many people are confined to chairs, and they must be listening to news where people have new freedoms and think, well, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
And certainly that applies to me, that it doesn't really matter what's happening in Tier 3 where we are now,
No, it
because
doesn't
it's
really.
the
Doesn't
same
affect
world
us.
for me. It's certainly till the end of December.
I'm very interested in the whole boundaries thing that you mentioned, and we haven't got any more time now, but it'd be interesting next week to look at that. I mean, things like language, certainly for Christians. I don't know about people in other faiths, but the way we talk about God, the way we tell other people about God, people who are not Christians, the language we use, the restrictions we put on ourselves when it that are perhaps cultural or matters of habit. And perhaps we'll look at that next week.
I know it's really important to you, isn't it, that somehow we have to find a way to break down some man-made boundaries. Is that what you're...
I think so. I mean, we've spoken about prayer. I mean, this morning when I got up early with the dog...
he got that in when he got up early with the dog. I hope
like
you
it.
heard that.
No, I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it. She sits next to me very quietly. And I was praying. And my prayer went from a moan to a sort of cry to something akin to begging. And then something warm and nice and close, and there is a liturgy of the heart that is full of being with God.
Yeah.
It's different, and it's easier to talk to people about that actually than to use some of the ways that we normally do. Anyway. I'd love to hear what other people think about that.
Absolutely.
I really would.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear of your feelings about Advent, your feelings about where you are at the moment, and, anything really. We just like hearing from you.
We'll see you next week.
See you
Bye
next
bye.
week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.